Whether it's industries crippled by high energy costs, labour market shortages, or an acute lack of progress in the areas of digitalization and innovation, the problems plaguing the German economy have been well documented. But what can be done to restore growth into a tired economic engine, and is there a case for optimism? To discuss this, I'm joined now by Clemens Fuest, head of the Ifo Research Institute and an eagle-eyed observer of the German economy. Clemens, your institute has just brought out its latest survey of German business leaders, and it seems that overall they're actually feeling more optimistic than they have in a while. And the German government has also slightly raised its growth outlook for this year, albeit only to 0.3%. What's driving this hope?
So what's driving this is basically private households and consumption demand. We've seen positive data in retail, for instance, and that's the explanation is that private households have rising incomes, and incomes are rising more quickly than inflation. So households have finally begun to spend more. We expected this to happen already in the first quarter. This hasn't happened, but it's coming on now. So we see positive data from retail, from some services sector. The downside at the moment is that this hasn't reached manufacturing. So in manufacturing, the reading is still weak. There is a little less pessimism than a couple of months ago now, but the situation is not really improving. Companies are missing orders and they don't plan to expand production. And the other issue is that in construction, investment is very low, so there is too little housing construction, and this has been going on for some time, and there's no recovery there. So it's a recovery in part of the economy, but not in the entire economy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I want to break this down a little bit more by sector. Your survey looks at how businesses are feeling now and what they're expecting to happen in the next 6 months. Describe to me a little bit more about how these two measurements are diverging across sectors.
So in industry, for instance, we see that expectations have improved a little, but that's mainly because companies were very pessimistic, and this is now coming back a little. The current business situation, however, is worsening. So companies are saying, we haven't seen more orders up to now. We will not increase production, but we don't think things will be worse in the coming months. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a lot better. In services, expectations have improved and pessimism has receded also. We also see this in retail, where things are improving. In the construction industry, the outlook has been very bleak for some time now there as well. Pessimism has receded a little, but from a very low level.
OK, so it's a bit of a mixed picture. The BDI, that's an industry group representing around 100,000 German companies. It recently came out with two big demands for the government. First of all, they want energy prices brought down in the long term, and they also want a reduction in the 30% corporation tax rate, claiming it's turning away foreign investment. Where do you stand on both of those issues?
Well, I think the corporate tax is quite clear. Corporate taxes in Germany are the highest or the second highest among the G7 countries. It's above average in the OECD, so there is a case for cutting the corporate tax rate or introducing some tax incentives to improve conditions for investment in Germany. Energy prices are more complex. It is quite clear that energy prices are key for at least some sectors of manufacturing. At the same time, what the government cannot and should not do is subsidize energy in the long term. So if Germany has become a place of high energy costs, it would not be smart to continue specializing on energy-intensive industry. Of course, energy prices to some extent do reflect political decisions. Do we allow for nuclear energy? Do we push the expansion of renewable energy? So there's a lot of political influence on energy supply. And I think the BDI is right in asking the government to accelerate grid investment and to accelerate energy supply, to raise energy supply. I think what the government shouldn't do is pay outright subsidies.
If there is a good argument for Germany to move away from some of these particularly energy-intensive industries, where should it focus its attention instead?
That's, of course, the key question. And I think Germany needs to be open for structural change without imposing any particular industry, without choosing or picking winners from any particular industry. I think we need better conditions for the creation of new companies. We need to make room for structural change, but we cannot direct and should not direct structural change. It's very hard to determine in which areas Germany will be competitive in the future. In the past, it was cars, it was the chemical industry, it was the pharmaceutical industry, and some of that will survive. But we have a very large number of companies in Germany, the so-called hidden champions, who are often very specialized, not very well known. It's often B2B. So I think we need to make room for these companies. These companies suffer from bureaucratic burden, a lack of employees, high taxes, and I think that's what the government needs to do. So the homework would be to improve general conditions for these companies and let them expand when they can, so that markets decide about where the future of the sectoral structure is. It wouldn't make sense to impose any particular sectoral structure for the future politically.
And no growth can happen without people. There are currently well over 436,000 open vacancies in Germany. Over half of them are in the transport, logistics and automotive sectors, areas that are fundamental drivers of the economy. The government recently introduced a new immigration law intended to make it easier to attract more workers from abroad. Is it too early to know yet whether it's having an effect?
There is some immigration to Germany, into the German labor market, but it's certainly not enough. And this is tricky, and this won't happen from one day to the next. I think it's fair to say that the German labor market is very open, so it's not very difficult to immigrate into Germany if you have a job. It's easy to immigrate. I think what we are lacking is the entire infrastructure around people immigrating. For instance, the bureaucratic burden again on immigrants is large. So if people come here, let's say a software engineer from India comes to Germany, such a person would have to deal with the authorities, the permits. This infrastructure is not very friendly and not very open. So I think we need to get better along those lines. But the good news is, in principle, the rules are relatively liberal. So people can come to Germany and work here, but this has to be better known. Of course, the language is a barrier. There's not much we can do about it. Learning German is difficult. Fewer people speak German than English or French. So maybe again in companies also we have to be more open to people who don't speak German and can still be very productive.
So do you think this is perhaps more of a cultural shift that's needed?
It certainly is a cultural shift that's needed, achieving more openness, but achieving cultural shifts is not something that's very easily done. Nevertheless, we have to work on it, and the public sector can contribute to that by changing the administration, by facilitating rules, by creating welcome centers, not just at individual institutions. Companies could do this jointly, and the public institutions could join in. So I think we could do a lot to be more welcoming to immigrants we badly need for the labor market.
We do have some case studies of how immigration can affect the labour market. The Ifo Institute has done some interesting research looking at what's happened in the 20 years since the EU welcomed 10 new members. And if we look at how it's panned out, overall there are more than 800,000 people from these countries currently employed in Germany. The biggest share of them come from Poland, followed by the Czech Republic and Hungary. What kind of sectors have benefited most from this internal EU migration?
So internal EU migration has often gone into sectors with medium to low wages, has often gone to sectors where many Germans don't want to work. So it has been tremendously useful as a form of integration. It has helped the German economy. If we go back further in history into the 50s and 60s, there we had immigration from Southern Europe that have helped. These people have helped to build up the German industrial base and maintain the German industrial base. In more recent years, people from Eastern Europe did also go into the manufacturing sector, but a lot of them went into services, into the health sector. These sectors today wouldn't work without these immigrants.
So what kind of a profile of person is most needed? Because I was quite interested to see the small number of people from the Baltics that have come to Germany. They are, of course, countries with small populations, but Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, they're way down that list. And having joined the bloc in 2004, they've developed into highly digitalized, advanced economies. Why has Germany not been able to attract these kinds of really high-skilled, digital savvy workers?
I think we need to see that there is a lot of competition. So a lot of people from Poland, from Eastern European countries have migrated to the United Kingdom, where maybe the language is easier. And then there are, of course, other countries where people can go. Switzerland attracts a lot of migrants. The Scandinavian countries do. So there's a lot of competition. Nevertheless, there are particular profiles that aren't badly needed. So the health sector needs people, nurses and doctors also. The digital economy needs competent people. But overall, in a very broad range of areas, the automotive industry, many manufacturing sectors need people to come. Now, there has been a lot of emigration from Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. And as a matter of fact, these countries have also suffered because it's often the most qualified and the most brilliant who leave and who go to other countries. So a lot of people have left these countries, wages have increased. So the potential for further immigration to Germany from these countries is seriously limited, meaning we need to look to other places more globally, to India, to Africa, to Latin America. And that's more tricky because it's far away. And people, again, will maybe think more of migrating to the US or other countries. Germany is competing with a lot of places in the world.
But in this context, though, we do need to talk about the prospect of further EU expansion. What kind of a boost would the German labour market get if Ukraine joined the bloc, for example?
Well, Ukraine is a large country, but it's just one country. And I mean, how this war ends is an open question, but there will be a lot of work to do in Ukraine. Of course, people will probably emigrate because there will also be jobs missing, or at least well-paid jobs missing. So I think Ukraine alone as a potential is limited. I seriously think we need to look outside the EU for migrants that would be interested in coming to Germany. So Ukraine will not be enough, and Ukraine does need its people to rebuild the country.
OK, I want to talk about trade as well. These are especially geopolitically tense times. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz recently visited China with a big trade delegation in tow. There's been a lot of talk about de-risking the relationship with Beijing, but almost literally no action, given that German investment in China has never been higher. What is Germany's actual strategy when it comes to doing business with China?
I think that Germany does see the increased geopolitical risks. It sees the conflict between its relations to the US and to China. Nevertheless, China is an important partner. And let's face it, to the extent that the US and other countries withdraw from China, gains from trade for Germany and for Europe will increase. So my understanding of the German strategy is that yes, the German government will tell companies, if you invest in China and there is a problem, there is a crisis, you are on your own. So don't count on the government to rescue you. How credible that is another question. But it's de-risk. So that's de-risking. They probably also talk to companies and tell them diversify your supply chains. But it's certainly not a withdrawal from China. it's simply too interesting to trade with China, and withdrawing from it completely now, even before a crisis has happened, is a bit like committing suicide for fear of death. So there may be increasing pressures from the US in the future to be more critical about China and to withdraw more, but at the moment I think there are reasons to maintain relations to China, and that's what's going on.
So in concrete terms, de-risking doesn't mean too much, does it?
I think in concrete terms, de-risking means that companies, each individual company needs to think about its relations to China. And that's what companies do. The financing of investment in China should be such that if something happens, if there is an expropriation, this shouldn't endanger the company as a whole. So it means some ring fencing in terms of financing is needed. And in terms of supply chains, we need to look very carefully at the dependencies. But I think this focuses more on particularly critical products. I think antibiotics are an example. So if we depend on China entirely in antibiotics and in a crisis, we would be in difficulties within 4 weeks. I think in this case, de-risking means getting antibiotics from somewhere else or producing them at home. But in other areas, there are many goods where things are not so critical. Solar panels, wind turbines. I mean, if we import those from China and there is a crisis and we can't import them anymore, we have an installed capacity. So not getting more solar panels from China will be the least of our concerns. So I think it's okay to go on importing those from China.
Yeah, and we should say that the government has actually done quite a lot to attract more companies to produce pharma products in Germany in recent times. Finally, Clemens, dissecting the German economy is your bread and butter. What should we, the media, be talking about more than we currently do?
I think we should talk more about productivity. We talk more about scarcity of employees, demographic change, reducing the number of employees. But I think we need to think harder about how efficiently we use the labor force. We should talk more about innovation, about new companies, because we can only face this future with a declining number of employees, with the burden of decarbonization, with geopolitical tensions, if we become more productive and if we do more in research and development. So we should talk more about productivity.
So does that mean working longer hours or working more intelligently?
The latter, working more intelligently. Working longer hours is one thing, but it can be hard. And if people don't want it, what do you do? I think we need to focus more on being smarter and using our resources more intelligently.
Clemens Fuest, head of the Ifo Research Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.